The anti-hero is the real world's hero. If an inspirational cape savior was dropped into our world and faced to reckon with the complexities of actual life, the result would be another angsty vigilante with sliding morals, a grim outlook, and a whole lot of collateral damage in their way. And yet, while anti-heroes abound in today's media landscape, audiences never really get a moment to catch their breath and consider what exactly an anti-hero is. It could be a good guy doing bad things or a bad guy doing good things. Either way, walking this moral tightrope has resulted in compelling storytelling for a number of comic book protagonists operating in the gray. There is a plethora of characters worthy of the anti-heroic title, but only the best of the gritty good guys and the blameless baddies are among the top 10 comic book anti-heroes. What makes for an enduring anti-hero? No matter their comic of origin, each of these anti-heroes excels in two meaningful ways, performing morally questionable actions in a sympathetic light and impacting the fandom and culture at large. Morally questionable actions usually consist of law-breaking, but can essentially be anything that is deemed socially unacceptable or taboo. Plus, these actions are shown in a way that asks the reader to empathize with the character. Rorschach of Watchmen fame is a violent man. However, readers sympathize with him as they are subjected to the injustice of Rorschach's world. After all, anti-heroes are imperfect and tend to reflect real life more so than old-fashioned vanilla heroes. The final criterion rests with the audience. How do fans and culture at large react to the anti-hero? The fans dictate what becomes canon based on what they respond to, and the best anti-heroes find themselves everywhere due to the aforementioned demand. As their star grows, the comic medium becomes too small an arena. They move on to captivate films, gaming, and TV audiences with their plight. Wolverine is a fan favorite among the X-Men, but the character's wider appeal is demonstrated by his 3 solo films, all within a greater film franchise that he was the lead of. These criteria make for the best anti-heroes, demonstrating a staying power rivaling even the purest of champions. Our first anti-hero wound up serving the devil, but luckily that's not required when subscribing to Plot Armor Comics. Number 10. GhostRider. The spirit of vengeance is unique among our anti-heroes in that multiple characters have carried the flame atop their skulls. The best known is Johnny Blaze, the son of an acclaimed stunt performer. Johnny would be adopted by the ironically named family friend Crash Simpson after his father's death during a stunt. But Crash would eventually be stricken with cancer, and Johnny would turn to the arcane, summoning the devil, i.e. Mephisto. The demonic entity promised to cure Crash of his illness, but consequently forced Johnny to serve as his henchman. Crash would be healed, but would tragically die in a stunt not long after. Nevertheless, Johnny would become the GhostRider every night, serving as an unwavering hammer of justice. This role would eventually fall to Robbie Reyes, a young mechanic trying to eke out an existence for himself and his little brother in LA. He enters an illegal street race with his car from his workplace, but winds up being pursued by cartel members. Though they leave him for dead, he is instead possessed by the spirit of GhostRider, which was inhabiting the car. The human stories beneath the flaming skull are the grounding force for the vengeance boiling at the surface. The hellish powers that both Johnny and Robbie grapple with are outside the general perception of where justice comes from. Oftentimes, we're led to believe that it comes from angelic or good sources. However, the GhostRider marries the concept of justice with vengeance. But this dalliance with the devil is made with good intentions behind it. Johnny wants his surrogate father to be okay, and Robbie wants to provide a safer life for his little brother. This would go over well with the fans, resulting in the character being given a second life in Ultimate Comics. Johnny would see cinematic stardom in feature films, while Robbie would appear in Marvel Cinematic Universe via Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. He has not been seen during the Disney Plus era, probably on account of the subject matter. The Mouse House would be wise to stay far away from our next anti-hero then. Number 9. Rorschach. Life is all about compromise, whether in a personal or professional context. When it becomes necessary to work with other people, it then becomes necessary to compromise. We may give up certain beliefs, habits, or relationships to please a certain person or achieve a specific goal. This concept is completely alien to Walter Kovacs, better known as Rorschach. His coda on compromise is evidenced by his admirably candid statement, "Never compromise, not even in the face of Armageddon." To his credit, Rorschach has touched on a topic that comes up repeatedly when covering anti-heroes, the law and its relationship to justice. Kovacs is a madman vigilante determined to rid New York City of the vermin who terrorize the innocent amid an apathetic public. While early in his career he'd try to leave the criminals alive, a specific event changed Rorschach forever. He would investigate the kidnapping of a girl but find something unimaginable had befallen her. The kidnapper not only murdered the child but fed her remains to his dogs. This led to a psychotic break in Kovacs that ended with his murder of the kidnappers. Separately, the US government implemented the Keene Act, which outlawed vigilantism. In direct response to this, Rorschach would kill a serial rapist and display his body in front of a police station bearing the word never. What can someone do when justice comes too late or never at all? Walter Kovacs' answer is fear and punishment. Rorschach's campaign of terror against those who wage terror is an understandable reaction. The Rorschach mantle would be taken up by subsequent characters, but none of them ever lived up to the determined fury of Kovacs. The character would memorably be brought to life by way of 2009's Watchmen. Interestingly enough, Rorschach shares more than a few similarities with our next anti-hero. Number 8. Judge Dredd. He is the law, and it's exactly that fact that makes Judge Joseph Dredd such an enlightening character to read. In the future dystopia that the comics are set in, judges are essentially the entirety of the Justice Department. Dredd, upon encountering criminals, is legally able to serve as judge, jury, and executioner, therefore bypassing what many see as the bureaucracy associated with long judicial processes. Thanks to the judges, there are no more long trials to endure or loopholes for criminals to escape through. To hammer home this point, Judge Dredd's firearm is literally named the Lawgiver. The morally questionable actions should be evident, enabling one man, biases and indoctrination included, to deliver justice to a city block with upwards of 50,000 residents is outrageous and reminiscent of fascism. However, there are two sympathetic angles that readers gravitate toward with Dredd. First, Dredd didn't choose what he is. In reality, he is a clone of the founder of the Judges, Fargo, and had a brother that was a mere 12 minutes older than him. This brother, Rico, would grow more corrupt as he served, accepting bribes and favors and eventually landing himself in a penal colony on one of the moons of Saturn. Dredd would be forced to kill his own brother, and presumably recognize the fate that had befallen his sibling. Corrupted justice is no justice at all. Rico had fallen to the criminality that he had been born to squash. However, the second sympathetic angle rests in what some may see as the fallacies in American and British law. As Judge Dredd experienced significant popularity in both countries, the character would be utilized to satirize various issues relating to the dispensing of justice. This would manifest in the aforementioned corruption, intimidation of juries, biases of authority figures, etc. Dredd would be a catch-all character for every way the law would fail people. He'd enjoy widespread publication in the form of comics and even traditional novels detailing Dredd's further adventures. The futuristic lawman would find some mainstream success once he was adapted to film, first in 1995's Judge Dredd and then again in 2012's Dredd. But he's got nothing on the next guy who's been slicing through cinemas since the early 2000s. Number 7. Wolverine. He's the best there is at what he does, and what Wolverine does best is toe the line between savage beast and idealistic hero. Audiences remember Logan best from his time as part of the X-Men, but cannot be forgotten that he was initially introduced as a villain of the Incredible Hulk. He was serving as an agent of the Canadian government at the time, but his roguish instincts go beyond his handlers. Logan houses an animalistic furor known as his berserker rage that erupts when provoked. The triggers for this rage usually involve impending danger to himself or those he cares for. It quickly becomes unbridled, as seen when Wolverine would escape Weapon X by massacring everyone in the facility. However, these were scientists who had laced Logan's bones with adamantium in what was certainly an excruciating process. After this, they brainwashed the future X-Man into slaughtering the entire town of Roanoke as a kind of demonstration of their scientific success. The dehumanizing experiments that Logan endured, while not justifying the slaughter, gained readers' sympathies when following Wolverine on further adventures. The character offers writers nuanced ways of approaching humanity's relationship to its more animalistic roots, i.e. tenacious emotions and feelings that stomp over the hallowed grounds of rational thought and moral behavior. Wolverine would confront his violent nature several more times thanks to the character's mass appeal. What If would experiment with events in Wolverine's past to explore the violent aspects of his character. One would even see him take up the mantle of Apocalypse's Horseman of War. He subsequently slaughters everyone, including Apocalypse himself. He would butcher his fellow X-Men in both the post-apocalyptic Old Man Logan and the plague-ravaged Marvel Universe vs. Wolverine. By forcing Logan to deploy his violent tendencies for dark yet necessary reasons, comics like these allow readers to grapple with emotions they may feel are particularly strong or downright out of control. To Wolverine's massive credit, he's not only brought this reflective feature to comic book fans, but to mass audiences in droves. The character has essentially carried the X-Men film series since its inception in 2000, while also remaining a regular on animated hits like the classic X-Men cartoon of the 90s. Plus, he's a playable character in the Marvel Ultimate Alliance game series. Marvel really hopes audiences want more Wolvie. Meanwhile, DC hasn't even managed to get the next anti-hero in a single live-action movie yet. Number 6. Red Hood, Jason Todd. It's less about the former Robin's film appearances and more about his unflinching loyalty to his own moral code. No bridge is too far to cross if it means stopping a villain. Jason Todd wasn't always like this, though. Batman first took notice of Jason when the young hoodlum attempted to steal the tires off the Batmobile. Several months of training later, and Jason would be the second incarnation of Robin, the fearless sidekick of the Caped Crusader. However, hints that the boy was greatly jaded surfaced almost immediately. Jason would fail to save a criminal from plummeting to his death, with there being strong implications that the boy wonder had actually shoved him. Not long after this, Jason would have the most pivotal encounter of his life when his mentor's arch-nemesis, the Joker, would begin blackmailing the young sidekick's mother. Jason would attempt to rescue her alone at an isolated warehouse but receive a brutal beating from the clown prince of crime and his not-so-clownish crowbar. An explosion, burial, and resurrection via Lazarus Pit later, and Jason would stalk his former stomping grounds with a new persona but with the same old attitude. Justice must know no boundaries to defeat those who perpetuate injustice with no boundaries. In essence, Red Hood contends with similar issues to those of Rorschach and Judge Dredd, the shortcomings of the law and what the solution to said shortcomings may be. Jason's upbringing makes him relatable, as he was orphaned at a young age due to criminal activity and was forced to scrape together a meager existence by lifting tires. An orphaned child with zero advantages overcoming impossible odds to transform into a protector of Gotham City is downright miraculous. So, when the child eventually turns bitter, abandons the principle that keeps him from taking life, and begins an unforgiving war on crime, readers don't complain all that much. Red Hood's goals are admirable, and he serves as a perpetually relevant foil to his former mentor. Jason's impact on the trajectory of Batman is perhaps his greatest claim to fame, as that tragedy would haunt the Caped Crusader forever. Jason's rigid demand for what's right is what endears the Red Hood to audiences, though comic fans have generally been content to keep him as a supporting character in Gotham. He's enjoyed successful animated outings like Batman Under the Red Hood and even starring a role in the Titans HBO Max series. He needs a catchy nickname, like the Batman with Guns or the Merc with a Mouth. Actually, that one's taken. Number 5. DeadPool. And Wade Wilson definitely wants royalties if we're going to be shopping out his title to the rival company. Maybe that's the sole trait of Deadpool's that beguiled audiences, his brutal honesty. Yes, he knows DC exists, and yes, he certainly wants his fair share of the merchandising pie. But his most defining characteristic is his apparent ability to break the fourth wall and speak directly with readers. This is a weirdly honest action in a medium essentially made up of lies, and it gives the Merc with a Mouth an edge that most Marvel characters lack. This is especially pertinent given his somber backstory. Wade is diagnosed with cancer and, seeing hope in the superhuman, volunteers for Department K's branch of the Weapon X program. This cures his illness while also granting him superhuman abilities, including healing and enhanced reflexes and strength. This guy should be put on the Wheaties box. I mean, how is he an anti-hero? Well, not only does he have a tendency to be excessively violent, but he owes allegiance to neither side of the moral spectrum. Insofar as his violence, readers need no more demonstration than Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe. Spoiler alert, the title. But Deadpool is usually doing his own thing in the comics and never sets out to save the universe or any of that hero junk. Usually the Merc with a Mouth simply stumbles into important places at important times and must do the right thing or the wrong thing, or really anything that will accomplish something for him. For example, Wade would lure the villain Madcap out into the open by using his very own daughter, Eleanor. In an unrelated episode, Deadpool would send Kitty Pryde careening through the air with a punch, all in an effort to goad Wolverine into fighting. Wade Wilson is not bound to the conventional rules of his world or ours. Why else would he break the fourth wall if not to break the very relationship between characters and their writers? Not to mention his breaking of the culture itself. DeadPool has remained a Marvel mainstay ever since debuting, but he reached epic new levels of stardom when his eponymous 2016 feature film arrived to rave reviews. This has so far warranted one sequel and another on the way. There was some sort of film depicting Wade Wilson in 2009, but we try not to reopen old wounds here. There are plenty of wounds to be had with a guy calling himself the Lethal Protector, though. Number 4. Venom, Eddie Brock. A quote from the symbiote vigilante sums them up best.
No one threatens under our protection and walks away. They don't crawl away either.
This is the philosophy behind Eddie Brock and Venom's actions. There are those that fall under their protection, such as the honest, innocent, or virtuous, that warrant protection from those that are stronger. This probably stems from the anti-hero's origin, which saw Eddie crushed following the virtual destruction of his journalistic career, due in large part to Spider-Man. Feeling alone and hopeless, Eddie would flock to a local church with the intent to end his life. He would arrive just in time to bond with the Venom symbiote, fresh off rejection by Spider-Man, and unite in a shared quest for vengeance against the wall crawler. The morally questionable actions begin with Venom's ferocious appetite for violence. Uniting characters in a toxic stew of rage and resentment results in catastrophe for all those involved. Venom's more than willing to bloody someone up to get what they want, such as when they break Black Cat's nose while interrogating her. Additionally, one of Venom's first storylines involves General Taylor seeking retaliation for the vigilante's murder of his son, which Venom totally did. At one point, they decided to eat a dude's brain once regular food stopped doing it for them. That's pretty gnarly. So why do audiences still love the dark, endearing pair? Eddie Brock's personal background factors in heavily, as the former journalist suffered abuse at the hands of his father. The probable reasoning was that the senior Brock blamed Eddie for his mother's death, as the latter died during childbirth. This tragic upbringing, combined with Venom's later attempts to do right by those they care for, garners significant sympathy for Eddie. He has needed the empowerment he never received from his father, and in a touching way, Venom grants him that. The Lethal Protector has far outgrown his humble origins, inspiring a Venomverse worth of comics as well as essentially making his visage a cultural icon. Throw in decades of appearing in Spider-Man animations and a franchise of relatively successful films, and Venom starts to look like the most successful anti-hero of all time. Interestingly enough, they've got nothing on a legendary comic chain smoker. Number 3. John Constantine. Revisiting the land of the occult, John Constantine is similar to Venom in that they were both blamed by their fathers for the deaths of their mothers. But Constantine brings a decidedly cerebral flair that the Marvel vigilante cannot hope to replicate. The morally gray area that the magician occupies is philosophically engaging territory. However, the tone of Constantine's life can be summed up by one single action. As a boy, he excised his own childhood innocence and locked it away in a box. There's not a hint of optimism anywhere in Constantine's stories, which oftentimes blend their cynical outlook with thought-provoking ideas and humor. It is this lack of idealism that brings readers to the stories, as they can expect not to be handled with kid gloves. But such an audience also warrants raising the emotional as well as ideological stakes. The harshness of the world is faced by many on a daily basis, and as Constantine himself articulates, there aren't any good guys, and there aren't any bad guys, there's just us, people, doing our best to get by. Acknowledging the gray area in a medium replete with black and white superheroes is refreshing, adding to the sardonic Constantine's appeal. This would lead to the character receiving further comic adventures, solo or alongside ensembles like the Justice League Dark. He'd receive a somewhat successful film adaptation in 2005, but would finally receive what many would consider the definitive portrayal in a self-titled TV series for NBC. Though this would be met with cancellation, fan reception to actor Matt Ryan's portrayal would extend the character's lifespan via the Arrowverse series of interconnected shows. Just like GhostRider, Constantine butts heads with supernatural forces and manages to stand his ground despite the heavenly onslaught he faces. But the best occult anti-hero is one who ventured to hell and back again, all for the chance to see his wife one more time. Number 2. Spawn. The anti-hero's reliance on alternative ways of combating injustice, including the use of demonic or supernatural forces, is something of a trope all its own. As the occult often falls outside the traditional cultural nomenclature, the use of such mysticism is seen as against societal norms and expectations. Therefore, when Albert Simmons is double-crossed and murdered while on a mission in Botswana, he finds himself in the realm of hell. But this proves to be just a pit stop rather than the final destination. Simmons negotiates with the demon Malbolgia to see his wife once more in exchange for serving as the devilish Hellspawn, a league of supernatural warriors that serve the demon. The two agree to the arrangement, but with a couple of catches. Malbolgia restores Simmons to life, but with a severely burned body and no memories of his previous life. Unable to remember his wife and forcibly bonded with his new devilry, what is Simmons to do? He takes the path of most anti-heroes, choosing to protect those who are unable to protect themselves. His morally dubious use of demonic powers, while not the most advantageous to one's spiritual health, grants him control over his circumstances, something Simmons feels he lost after having died and been resurrected. Readers sympathize with the man's devoted love for his wife, even braving the terrors of purgatory to simply lay eyes on her again. Spawn's story is a love story and is immediately relatable to all readers thanks to the universal nature of such attachments. Everyone can expect to eventually care for or fall for another, and this acts as an anchor through which they connect with Spawn. Plus, he's one of the most morally stubborn anti-heroes comic fans will encounter. There's no misleading Spawn, as his ethical code to subsume evil with righteousness is hardly ever compromised. The Hellspawn would eventually get revenge on Malbolgia and take over Hell himself. Spawn would prove massively popular in the mainstream. His eponymous comic is the longest-running independent comic series of all time, and the character has been adapted to other mediums, including the 1997 feature film. Talks have circulated regarding a future cinematic reboot of the character, but we continue to wait. In the meantime, our number one anti-hero has managed to gain relevance in recent years thanks to a tragedy, the resulting grief, and a seemingly limitless arsenal of stopping power. Number 1. Punisher. We conclude with yet another Marvel anti-hero initially championed as a villain, since Frank Castle appeared as a Spider-Man bad guy. But there's a heartbreaking story behind the iconic skull of a soldier who would come home and lose everything. The murder of his family by mobsters would flip a switch in Castle, probably the same that he'd used during his days in the war zone. A soldier would have to go from hero to monster in no time at all, and perhaps no other character has embodied such an idea with greater nuance than the Punisher. It's in his name. Castle is not a random aggressor, but an angel of vengeance with a clear mission: punish the guilty. Readers immediately clicked with the grim, ruthless Castle, recognizing their own insatiable need for justice in a suffering world. Though most anti-heroes wrestle with the idea of law not being enough at times, Punisher is the purest expression of such an idea. He waits for no man, no jury, no judge, and no trial. Castle is Judge Dredd, GhostRider, and Wolverine all rolled into one formidable force of fury. His popularity would lead him to continuing his war in the mainstream Marvel universe as well as in some notable variant stories. Perhaps the most pertinent is the time he killed every super-powered Marvel character, after a superheroic battle resulted in the death of Castle's family. Punisher Kills the Marvel Universe spotlights Castle's resolute will as he systematically takes out the superpowered folk of his reality. Yet, on Earth 11080, Castle is one of the last surviving members of the human race after a mysterious plague wiped out most of the population, including superheroes. One of the most iconic panels in the Punisher's history came on this Earth when he'd be forced to execute an infected Captain America. The vigilante's sheer tenacity carries him through even the most catastrophic of events, whether the death of his family or that of an entire reality. This doggedness has landed with readers and allowed the character to jump ship to the mainstream as well. Punisher has been portrayed in 3 live-action films as well as numerous appearances in animation and video games. The character's skull logo has become an independent symbol all its own, oftentimes used by members of the armed forces. The believability of such a character is what has given Frank Castle his staying power. He fights a broken justice system much like there is one in the real world, and he does it in memory of those he loves. The world is in need of punishment to some degree, and most readers feel Castle is the best arbiter of said retribution. He's also the best avatar for comic book anti-heroes grappling with gray while gunning for good, and thus is the best comic book anti-hero of all time. So, while many try to become the best, these anti-heroes excelled beyond what readers and perhaps even themselves expected. The era of this nuanced protagonist has only just begun, yet so many worthy characters strive to better their world by operating in the gray. These gritty good guys and blameless baddies, despite their shortcomings, are the real world's heroes. Well everyone, that does it for this video. On behalf of Plot Armor Comics, I've been Morse Code, and thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next video.